This is Total Retail Tech Insights.
The content retail executives need to optimize their use of technology throughout their organizations.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of Total Retail Tech Insights. I'm Joe Keenan, Editor-in-Chief of Total Retail, and I am joined today by Sanjeev Sularia, who is the co-founder and CEO of Intelligence Node. We're going to talk to Sanjeev today a little bit about, what retailers need to do and be looking at as they plan for 2021 and beyond, with a specific look at marketplaces and brands and manufacturers. So thanks for joining me today, Sanjeev.
My pleasure. Thanks, Joe, for having me.
So to get us started, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about Intelligence Node? And I mentioned that you're the co-founder. Tell us a little bit about why you started the company back in 2012.
Sure. I think a quick introduction to Intelligence Node. We are an AI-led real-time retail intelligence platform that empowers businesses to drive product-level profitability and grow margins using data-driven competitive insights. I think when we looked at the opportunity back in 2012 before we started the business, we were loosely looking at retail from a pricing lens. I think since then, now we serve retail on three core pillars, which is pricing, assortment, and product visibility. But when we started, we saw a very large fragmented vendors landscape in big consultants working on bespoke pricing strategy work, a very, very large services landscape in really large Fortune 500 evolved names working on customized services pieces, and then the birth of the software or machine-led price optimization market. But I think at the first principle level, what we saw one common factor missing from that entire ecosystem, and it was something as simple as that the shopper always has an option to go shop somewhere else. And that really wasn't taken into account. And that's the problem that we set out to solve. And I think in addressing that problem, what we've created in the last 8 years is the world's largest product retail database, where we track north of about 1 billion unique products. And this data set is what now helps us fuel the growth for more than nearly $600 billion in retail revenue globally.
So obviously, when you started the company back in 2012, you and your co-founder, it was a completely different retail environment than where we're sitting at now in 2020. And that's, many different factors. But, the latest challenge for retailers has been COVID-19. And, it's permanently changed the retail industry, many are saying. How would you kind of describe the state of the current retail industry given COVID-19 and kind of where we're headed as we look ahead to 2021 a little bit?
Sure. I think, the COVID-19 impact is not just on retail. I think over the last century, we've never had, this many economies. More than 90% of economies are experiencing GDP per capita contraction, which is, the highest since, or actually even higher than what we saw during the Great Depression in the 30s. And I think that's had an impact on every single sector, and retail is no, exception to it, where we've seen, retail sales decline on an average about 3.9%, which is nearly $1.2 trillion of loss compared to the pre-COVID numbers. And I think it's not just been the COVID in the last 1 year. We've seen the tit-for-tat tariff wars. We've seen the whole retail on the cusp of, specifically offline retail on the cusp of this recession leading into the pandemic. And if you look at the last decade, and I think even when we started the business, the e-commerce growth and boom has always been on the cusp of it. Everyone's been speaking about when e-commerce becomes high double-digit percentages of total retail globally, when would shoppers move to, becoming channel agnostic, and all those pieces have been pushed over the edge with the pandemic. And I think we're seeing results of that come through where e-commerce is growing, it's booming. Globally, if you look at North America now, we've seen, the e-commerce growth that took a decade to go from 5.7% in 2009 to 16% in 2019. Only about 8 weeks into the pandemic, we saw it jump another 10% and become 27%. We're seeing similar high double-digit number e-commerce penetration numbers as total retail in Europe, in Asia Pacific, while offline retail has been declining across the globe. So I think that's one big thing that we're seeing. I think other is the change shopper itself. one of the big changes that have happened to retail has been that a lot of people have learned how to shop online, or at least get over the hurdle of being comfortable with it for the first time. And I think this newfound shopper behavior isn't going away anytime soon. I think a combination of the switch of revenue and a shopper that is highly unlikely to switch back to traditional means of commerce would probably mean that pure play e-commerce and omni-channel efficiencies will drive the newfound retail reality into the next foreseeable future.
So you've identified a couple trends there. Obviously, the shift to more online digital purchasing, and to your second point there around a new type of buyer online. Some first-time customers, which leads me into our next discussion point, Sanjeev, about one specific facet of e-commerce that I wanted to talk about, which is marketplaces. Do you have any thoughts around what we're seeing in terms of marketplaces and potentially some do's and do's and don'ts for the marketplaces that are already out there, as well as the brands that are potentially selling on these marketplaces, such as your Amazons, your Walmarts, your eBays and Etsy's and the such. What are your thoughts there around kind of the state of marketplaces today?
Yeah, I think marketplaces, in just the nature of the beast, how they started pure play e-commerce to begin with. You named a few of those established global giants and Amazon and eBay, but the large offline players in Walmart and Kroger are all beginning to adopt that marketplace model. I think the whole hyper evolved digital shopper, they're not just looking for products online. They're doing side-by-side comparisons on product availability, price comparisons, reading reviews. They're greedy not just for best price, but a wide selection. And I think that's what fuels the growth for marketplaces. It's that battle for millions of SKUs and constant onboarding of as many sellers and merchants as you can, where it started in the pure play e-commerce to have a pure efficiency impact on not holding inventory. It's now becoming a standalone channel for a multi-channel strategy for large retailers as well. So I don't think marketplaces will carry on driving the growth, and there'll be a massive presence in the retail ecosystem. I think with the millions of merchants and sellers coming onto these marketplaces, the onus really lies on the marketplace owners to control those listings as well. From an unauthorized seller listing products that they should have never access to, pricing violations, price gouging, counterfeit listings. I think that's one massive threat to as marketplaces grow. And then I think from a do's perspective, we've seen some of the big names partner up with Shopify's and BigCommerce, the pure play e-commerce enablement platforms who can bring in hundreds and thousands and millions of already aggregated merchants to become a part of large evolved marketplace environments where they can take benefit of already converted customers. So I think we live in a shared economy, and I think from a marketplace perspective, we'll see a lot of sharing in terms of merchant aggregators and pure consumer aggregators come together to create a sort of more holistic marketplace on both fronts, not just on the inventory side, but consumption side as well.
Yeah, which leads me into kind of a follow-up there, Sanjeev, in terms of the brand experience on marketplaces. That's always been one of the trade-offs that, brands, whether they're debating, should I be selling on Amazon? Should I be selling on these other marketplaces? Is, yeah, there's traffic volume, but there's also, I'm giving up some brand control. I'm giving up some customer data. I'm giving up some of that listing control in terms of the product information that you were talking about. Do you see some trade-offs and the marketplaces kind of making some concessions there, or what do you kind of foresee in terms of that merchant control going forward on marketplaces?
It sure is a trade-off, right? I mean, there's a sheer distribution impact that comes in with these large marketplaces. They've become a very large wholesale channel for brands and manufacturers who do not want to go direct to consumer. And I don't think DTC is for everyone as well, because brands and manufacturers might, consider it to be a dollar growth channel or a substitute on the P&L dilution that is happening with existing impact to offline presence, but it's not that. It has its own erosion that comes onto the balance sheets. It's an expensive strategy to implement when you go direct to consumer. unless, the reason why you're doing DTC is purely for connecting with the consumer directly, which you can't do when you go on marketplaces, then, building loyalty and overall customer experience, it makes complete sense. But if you're looking for immediate revenue upticks and P&L benefits, they're not going to come immediately. So it's not a way to substitute your existing consumer reach. It is something that you have to build over time. And I think that's the trade-off. Because if DTC is a challenge, so is the governance on large marketplaces, where you have very little control on who else is listing product that is similar to your product, a substitute for your product, or there are sellers who are violating your own SLAs with these marketplaces and listing products that they should never have access to, or violating prices that you're trying to showcase in stores or through other offline wholesale channels. And I think this is where we'll see brands and manufacturers tighten the SLAs with these marketplaces on how products are listed, their descriptions, how they're presented to the consumer. Pricing controls would become more and more easy to track through technology, but the enforceability will still be a handshake between brands, manufacturers, and marketplaces together.
I want to cover kind of the other piece of the equation here, that in terms of brick and mortar retail, and kind of where we see this headed. And there's more and more consumers are opting for these omni-channel experiences with brands and retailers. With the growth of programs such as buy online, pick up in store, we've seen really an upshoot in the use of curbside pickup. More and more retailers are offering that because the demand is there, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. And I, foresee that, demand going beyond just when the pandemic is an issue. Tell us a little bit about kind of your thoughts on physical retail and kind of that omni-channel experience that retailers are trying to provide customers, making the best of their, their physical assets, making their retail stores more than just a place for transaction, but also services and an omni-channel hub, so to speak.
Absolutely right, Joe. I think omnichannel is not just a good to have, it's a must have. And, it's not just omnichannel in terms of a single view of a customer, but much more importantly, in a single view of inventory. The large brick and mortar retailers that have not just survived but thrived during the pandemic are the ones that allowed you to, buy online and have a pickup in store or curbside delivery. They made that online offline integration possible on the supply chain side and not just the customer experience side. And I think that becomes a must have as we go forward. We'll see more and more retailers convert low performing or isolated stores into dark stores for e-commerce fulfillment. Even at the top and the peak of the pandemic, when pure play e-commerce folks were struggling to just get the sheer workforce to meet the demand on the fulfillment side, it was easier for large brick and mortar players to reassign a lot of store workforce to e-commerce fulfillment, and they've been able to gain significant market share. So I think we'll see a lot of stores become micro warehouses, fulfillment centers, and not just experience centers in that omni-channel promise. And also on the omni-channel digital side, having a website was probably enough 15 years ago. It's not enough anymore. If you're going to take on that digital promise, then you need to still be playing in the same level field as what we spoke about marketplaces. There are hyper active marketplaces who can, do dynamic pricing and assortment optimization every few minutes. While for the brick and mortar market, it still remains months to quarters for them to respond to supply chain changes or even pricing changes. So that's another technology adoption that they would have to go through. And as we head into the holiday season and beyond, I think with the economic pressure on the larger masses across the globe, private label would probably play a massive role, where you're offering the same consumption need, having studied other national brands that you sell, and convert that into a more affordable offering through private label. We would see heavy investments. If it's not already being done, we would see more and more investments into private label from retailers as well.
Yeah, I think we've seen news of that in recent weeks and months around private label, but I want to get back to a little to the omni-channel promise and the execution of that. So it's easy to promise that you're going to give this omni-channel experience. It's another thing to deliver on that promise. And talk a little bit, Sanjeev, about the kind of the technology infrastructure and the systems needed to enable that, whether it's, the inventory transparency that you need to make buy online, pick up in store a reality, or curbside pickup a reality. Talk a little bit about kind of ensuring that you have the right technology infrastructure to be a true omni-channel retailer.
I think supply chain's a no-brainer. You need to start by having a single view of inventory. If you're allocating specific inventories by different channels, that you're not omni-channel in its true format for sure. You're just a multi-channel player that's trying to give customers different options to purchase, but you're having massive burden on your balance sheet by allocating inventory separately. So that's a must-have. And then I think even when customers are coming to your digital forefront or offline storefront, they're going to be always comparing. We spoke to nearly 6,000 shoppers on the ground over the last 9 months through varied periods of holiday season, the tariff war, the start of the pandemic, the e-grocery boom, and with some sort of recovery coming in now. And a resounding 94% of them said that they either look for product availability or do price comparison even when shopping online. So that is a shopper that is definitely omni-channel, which is utilizing technology in their hands, which is mobile phones, to look for product availability elsewhere, do search on product descriptions, reviews, what their peers are saying, and definitely a component of price comparison that comes in. So I think technology that is current and prevalent for that hyper-evolved shopper is a must. It's not just the experience on having a cool looking website or making delivery possible closest to the consumer. I think having technology that understands those breadcrumbs that the customer leaves behind, willingly as well as unwillingly, I think you have to collect all of them and understand that hyper-evolved shopper and make sure that your omni-channel tech stack serves to that customer as well. And that means at an assortment level, at a pricing level, at a product visibility level.
So we've talked about marketplaces. We then just talked a little bit about the retailer. And you've alluded to the brand here in this whole conversation, and the brand and the manufacturer. And you've touched a little bit about D2C, and that's a common refrain that that brands are going to start and should start selling direct to consumer. Again, easier said than done in some cases, but brands have really been impacted. With the effects of COVID-19, the closure of many stores for a certain period, the wholesale and brand manufacturers have seen their challenges. So let's talk a little bit kind of about the positioning of branded manufacturers as we look ahead to the rest of Q4 and into 2021. Tell us a little bit about your thoughts on where they sit right now and kind of what you see in the future in terms of the best positioning their own brands for success going forward.
Sure. I think another major problem that specifically lifestyle brands and manufacturers are likely to run into, even as we come out of the pandemic and begin our recovery, would be inventory turns around. With heavy concentration of lifestyle products being produced outside the United States, and a majority of them being concentrated in China, the tariff wars might come back. Supply chain turnaround times might become longer. So I think where do you produce, how do you produce, those changes need to start happening now. From a customer positioning perspective and your proposition as a call out for that loyalty and repeated engagement from customers, millennial and Gen Z shoppers are very heavy on sustainability and what the brand stands for outside just the consumption promise. I think we'll see re-commerce become, as a standalone opportunity for a lot of brands to capitalize on. What do they stand for in terms of sustainability outside the core brand tenants would become more interesting. I think more and more brands are coming out and standing up for social issues. I think the millennial Gen Z shoppers are very sensitive about that. So, and then what kind of environment do you provide to customers as they return back to stores would be really important as well. How safe do you make them feel? How easy do you make their checkout process? Because, from pre-pandemic, where you wanted customers to spend as long as they could in stores and malls so they could shop as much as they can. I think that experience would have to get reversed, where similar to e-commerce, you would have to provide them with an environment where they can come in, discover, pick up a product and check out as quickly as they can, because it'll take time for shoppers to get comfortable, exposing themselves to public places.
One of the things that brands have always struggled with, and those that sell wholesale to retail clients, in terms of direct to consumers, do they feel like they're undercutting those relationships that they have with their wholesale partners? When you think about direct to consumer, what are some of the things that you think brands should be considering as they determine, what makes sense for their particular brand in terms of selling direct to consumer, and without ruining or upsetting some of the wholesale relationships that they already have in place?
I think a DTC strategy should only be approached for connecting with that consumer. Building loyalty, overall consumer-based media equation. I think that's where direct-to-consumer is in the short run. Of course, over time, you want to replace that with the same distribution impact your current wholesale partners provide you, but that's going to take time. So the erosion on the revenue side that you're going to see from wholesale is a no-brainer. How do you balance the two is even trickier, and very few brands have been able to get that correct. I think one to call out is what Nike's done, and their migration from with no direct to consumer presence to now where that's becoming their single-minded board level mandate to evolve and become a direct to consumer brand. I think very few brands like Nike have done that successfully. So that's the tricky part on how do you plan your direct to consumer strategy and with what goal in mind do you do it? Because if you're doing it to become a revenue growth channel on its own without any kind of dilution with the existing business and existing SKUs, that's just never going to happen.
Yeah, and I think to your point of, you have to forecast and kind of build in that dilution of the existing wholesale business. And two, the point is the major reason you want to go direct to consumer, in addition to potential revenue, is that customer data that you're going to be able to collect. If you're losing out on that customer data, understanding your customers is that kind of what you would cite as key to that direct to consumer experience.
Exactly, and I think with social commerce coming in a big way, I think that's another way for brands to slowly enter the direct to consumer space, understand the sentiment of the shoppers, open out your social media commerce channels probably to begin with before you go complete direct to consumer. I think quite a few brands are beginning to do that and get on top of that customer sentiment. Is probably a great way before you decide to take the plunge and go complete direct to consumer across all channels.
Yeah. So this has been a really interesting conversation, Sanjeev. We're just about wrapped up here. I just, wanted to end with, how can our listeners learn a little bit more about you and your company, Intelligence Node?
So our website's www.intelligencenode.com, including a lot of the things that we spoke about on, how we've seen retail recovery start. We've got a lot of tools to play around with on the website, specifically looking at the e-grocery hyperlocal growth in the US, the fashion recovery that is beginning to happen. Plus, we've got a very large resources section on varied categories and geographies. Outside that, please follow us on Twitter at Big Data Node. And I personally have a Forbes Tech Council channel where I constantly speak about and write about my views on retail and how it's shaping up. So please feel free to follow that as well.
Great. Thank you, Sanjeev, for your time today. Again, you can get more information at intelligencenode.com, as well as the other channels that Sanjeev just mentioned. I appreciate the time today, Sanjeev. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening. For more information on this podcast, please check out our podcast channel page at mytotalretail.com/podcasts for show notes. Total Retail Tech Insights is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, and Stitcher. Make sure to subscribe on our podcast channel page as well. If you've enjoyed this episode, please take a few moments to rate and review this podcast. Thanks, and until next time, this has been Total Retail Tech Insights.